His wife told him to leave and not come back, and so he grabbed his suitcase and walked out the door without a single argument, without a raised voice, without even a look back. And she thought that was the end of him. What she didn't know, what she had never once thought to find out in 20 years of marriage, was that the quiet man she just dismissed had been the silent owner of the very building her entire empire was built inside. Every plate she served, every customer she charmed, every morning she unlocked that door and told herself she had built something all on her own. She had been paying him rent the whole time. And the night she snapped his suitcase shut and sent him out into the dark, she locked the evidence inside it with her own hands. So here is the question that is going to stay with you for the next 45 minutes. What happens when a woman spends 20 years underestimating a man in Crécy and then hands him the only thing he needed to take everything back? If you already know this one is going to be good, go ahead and hit that like button right now. It helps more people find these stories. And if you are new here, subscribe so you never miss one. We drop new stories every week, and you do not want to be late to this community. And before we go any further, drop your city in the comments. Where are you watching from today? Let us see where the family is tuned in from. Now let me take you back to where this all started. Back to a Tuesday night in Charlotte, North Carolina. Back to a kitchen table with a card and a candle that nobody was supposed to see. And back to the exact moment a patient man decided that enough was finally enough. Raymond had set the table at 6 o'clock. He had come home from work, showered, and put on the blue shirt Geneva had given him 2 Christmases ago. The one she said brought out the color in his eyes. He had stopped at the Food Lion on Central Avenue on his lunch break and picked up a card, a single candle, and the ingredients for the pot roast she had loved when they were first married. The roast had been in the oven since 4. The apartment smelled the way their early years used to smell, like something warm was waiting for you. He had written in the card before he set it on the table. Nothing long. Just that he was grateful. That 20 years felt like something worth marking. That he still meant what he said when he said it. The candle was lit by 7. By 10 the wax had pooled and gone flat. The roast had moved past, done into something quieter. Raymond had turned the oven down to warm, washed the prep dishes, and returned to the table. He did not eat. He sat with his hands folded and the radio on low. Gospel out of WGIV, the Sunday night program that ran later than it should. He listened to it without really hearing it. Geneva's key hit the lock at 11:03. She came through the door mid-laugh, her head turned back toward Curtis, who was right behind her, still finishing whatever had been funny on the drive over. She had on the cream blouse she wore to professional things and her good earrings, and her eyes were bright in the particular way they got when she had been out somewhere that had appreciated her. She stepped into the entryway, turned forward, and stopped. She looked at the table, the card, the burned-down candle. Raymond sitting there with his hands folded. Something moved across her face. Not guilt, not exactly. More like the mild irritation of a person who has walked into an inconvenience they did not plan for. Curtis stepped in behind her and moved past Raymond toward the refrigerator without a word. Not a greeting. Not a nod. He opened the refrigerator like it was his own and stood scanning it with the door hanging wide. Geneva set her purse on the counter and exhaled through her nose. She said, "Raymond, baby, you didn't have to do all this." Her voice was careful, practiced, the voice she used when she was managing something. She pulled out the bar stool across from him and sat on the edge of it, not all the way you sit when you don't plan to stay. She told him she had been doing a lot of thinking lately, that she felt like they had been growing in different directions for a while now, that she thought it might be good for both of them if he went and stayed with his cousin Jerome for a stretch, maybe a long stretch, while she had some space to figure things out. Raymond looked at her. He asked if she was serious. She said, "I wouldn't say it if I wasn't." From the kitchen, Curtis poured himself a glass of sweet tea from the pitcher Geneva kept on the second shelf. The sound of ice against glass was the only thing in the room for a moment. Then Curtis said, without turning around, "You heard her, Ray?" Raymond sat with that for exactly as long as it deserved. Then he reached across the table and picked up the anniversary card. He folded it in half along the crease. He put it in his shirt pocket, against his chest, and stood up. He did not say anything. He went upstairs. The old leather suitcase lived on the top shelf of the bedroom closet, pushed back behind his good coat and a box of tools he'd been meaning to sort. It was a battered thing, brown leather gone soft at the corners, a brass clasp on each side that had lost its shine years ago. Geneva had been after him to throw it out since before they moved to this house. She said it looked like something a man dragged behind him. He had never thrown it out. He pulled it down and set it on the bed. He packed the way he did everything, deliberately, without drama. Enough for a week, work clothes, his shaving kit, the photograph of his Uncle Earl from the nightstand. He did not take much. He had never needed much. Geneva appeared in the doorway while he was folding his second pair of slacks. She stood with her arms crossed, watching. Not sad, impatient, the way you watch a process you've already decided on and just need to see completed. When he brought the two sides of the suitcase together and reached for the zipper, she stepped forward. She pressed the brass latch down on the left side, then the right. "Snap," she said. "Make sure you didn't forget anything because the locks are getting changed tomorrow." Raymond looked at her. He picked up the suitcase. He carried it down the stairs, through the front room where the candle had finally gone cold, and out the front door. He did not slam it. The door clicked shut behind him the way a door does when someone closes it with intention. He put the suitcase in the back seat of his truck and got in behind the wheel. He did not start the engine. He sat there in the dark on the quiet Nodar street with his hands in his lap and the porch light of the house glowing behind him. Inside that suitcase, taped to the lining beneath the left panel where Geneva's hands had just pressed the latch, was a small silver key on a plain ring. She had no idea it was there. She had no idea what it opened. And before we can understand what Raymond did next, you need to understand how 20 years became that kitchen table, that folded card, and that clicking door. Raymond DeWitt had never been the kind of man who needed to be the loudest one in the room. He had grown up in West Charlotte watching his Uncle Earl move through the world that way, quietly, deliberately, without announcement. Earl DeWitt was not a flashy man. He drove a clean truck, kept his yard, paid what he owed, and built things slowly over time without telling anyone what he was building. Raymond had absorbed that way of being the way a child absorbs anything that comes from someone they love, not through instruction, but through observation. By the time he was grown, it was simply who he was. He met Geneva Price at a church cookout in the summer of 2004. She was 28, sharp-tongued and beautiful, with a laugh that drew a circle around her wherever she stood. She had big plans even then. She talked about opening her own place someday, a real restaurant, not a catering operation out of her apartment. Raymond had listened to her describe it with the particular attention of a man who recognizes something serious when he hears it. He had asked her 2 questions. She had liked that he asked questions instead of talking about himself. They were married 14 months later. The early years were good. Raymond worked his maintenance routes and paid the bills without complaint, while Geneva built her catering clientele from scratch. When she needed a commercial kitchen space for a pop-up, Raymond found her one and negotiated the short-term rental himself. When she needed equipment and the savings account was thin, he picked up weekend work without being asked. He did not do these things for credit. He did them because that was what a husband did. Geneva's ambition in those years was a beautiful thing to be near. It had heat and direction. Raymond was glad to stand beside it, but ambition, left to itself, has a way of reclassifying everything around it. By the time Geneva's Southern Table opened its doors on North Davidson Street in 2009, Geneva had begun to move through the world differently. The restaurant was real now, tables and menus and a write-up in the Observer's food section, and with that reality came a version of Geneva that Raymond had not yet met. She started attending industry events. She found a circle of women in Charlotte's black professional scene who gathered for brunches and conferences and weekend trips to Greenville and Atlanta. She bought new clothes for these occasions. She started talking about branding. She stopped talking about the two of them. Curtis had always been around. He was Geneva's younger brother by 3 years, charming in the careless way of men who have never had to try very hard, and he had positioned himself at Geneva's elbow from the moment the restaurant showed signs of success. He helped out at the register on busy Saturdays when they were first getting started. He ran errands. He made himself useful enough to stay permanent. And somewhere along the way, without Raymond quite seeing when it happened, Curtis had become the person Geneva consulted about her life. He was never openly hostile to Raymond. He was simply indifferent in a way that communicated something worse than hostility. He talked around Raymond at family dinners. He addressed questions about the restaurant to Geneva as though Raymond were not sitting at the same table. If Raymond offered an opinion on something, Curtis would respond to Geneva as though Raymond had not spoken at all. Geneva never corrected this. Over time, her silence on the subject became its own kind of instruction. The evolution, as Geneva came to call it privately, happened in stages Raymond could track if he paid attention. And he did pay attention. He just did not make a production of it. First, she stopped introducing him at professional events. Then she stopped mentioning him altogether. He found this out not by confrontation but by coincidence, running into a woman at the hardware store who had attended 3 of Geneva's dinners and expressed genuine surprise to learn she was married. Then there was the afternoon he came home early from a job and heard Geneva on the phone with her friend Anita, her voice carrying through the kitchen screen door to the back porch, where he had stopped to check the gutter. She was saying that Raymond was comfortable, that he was fine, that he was just not ambitious in the way that she needed someone to be right now. She said it the way you'd describe a piece of furniture that still worked, but no longer matched the room. Raymond stood on that porch for a long moment. Then he went back to the truck and drove to the hardware store for a part he didn't need. He did not bring it up that night. He did not bring it up, ever. His Uncle Earl had died in 2008, the year before the restaurant opened. He left Raymond the LLC quietly through Walter Gaines with a handwritten note that said simply, "Take care of it, and it will take care of you." Raymond had done exactly that. He managed the property, kept the books through the LLC's management system, and paid the taxes every year on time. He never told Geneva because it never occurred to him that he would need to. A man's business was his business. That was how Earl had lived. And so Raymond kept paying the property taxes on a strip of commercial real estate that his wife's entire identity now ran through, and he said nothing, and he waited for something he could not have named. He never once thought about using it against her. He never believed he'd need to, but Geneva and Curtis were building something on North Davidson Street, something they were very proud of, and they had never once stopped to wonder whose name was on the ground beneath their feet. Jerome DeWitt lived in a brick ranch on Tuckasegee Road that had belonged to their grandmother before she passed, and he had kept it exactly the way she left it. Same curtains, same smell of cedar and old carpet, same cast-iron skillet hanging by the stove that had not moved in 30 years. Jerome was 53, a quiet man like most DeWitt men, and when Raymond knocked on his door at midnight with a suitcase in his hand, Jerome looked at him for exactly 1 second, stepped back, and opened the door wider. He did not ask what happened. He put water on for coffee. Raymond sat at the kitchen table and did not say much. Jerome set a mug in front of him and sat across the way with his own, and the two of them stayed there in the comfortable silence of men who had grown up in the same family and understood that some things did not need to be explained before morning. Raymond drank his coffee. Jerome refilled it once without being asked. Eventually, Raymond said he appreciated it. Jerome said that was what family was for. Then they both went to bed. In the morning, Raymond woke before Jerome and sat alone in the kitchen while the early light came through the window over the sink. He had brought the suitcase into the room with him. He set it on the table and studied it for a moment, the way you study something you have not really looked at in a long time. The brown leather was worn pale at the corners. The brass clasps had gone the color of old pennies. Geneva had told him no fewer than a dozen times over the years that it was an embarrassment, that a grown man ought to have proper luggage, that she did not understand why he held on to things that had outlived their use. He unzipped the inside lining carefully along the left panel. The silver key was right where he had put it, taped flat against the backing with a strip of electrical tape that had held clean for years. He peeled it free and held it in his palm. It was small and unremarkable, the kind of key that could open anything or nothing, depending on what you knew about it. Jerome came into the kitchen, saw Raymond at the table with the key in his hand, and poured himself a cup without comment. Then he looked over and asked what it opened. Raymond said it opened something his uncle left him. Jerome nodded slowly, the way DeWitt men nodded when they understood that a thing was not being kept from them, but simply was not ready to be said aloud yet. He sat down, he drank his coffee. He did not ask again. Raymond left at 8:15 and drove alone to First Community Trust on Beatty's Ford Road. He had been inside the branch twice before, once when Uncle Earl walked him through the paperwork, and once a few years after Earl died to update his contact information. The branch manager, a composed woman named Denise, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, recognized the box number from his paperwork and retrieved the lockbox from the vault without ceremony. She brought it to a private room, set it on the table, and left him to it. Raymond used the silver key. Inside the box were 4 items: the original DeWitt Property Solutions LLC formation documents, filed with the state in 2008, with Raymond listed as sole managing member. The deed for 4400 North Davidson Street, recorded in Mecklenburg County, free and clear of any mortgage. A manila folder containing 15 years of lease records. 2 commercial tenants, payments logged monthly, account deposits confirmed, and a single-page printout from the LLC's property management account dated to the end of the previous quarter. The account balance was $263,000. Raymond sat with that page for a long time. He had known the lease payments were accumulating. He had simply never thought carefully about what accumulating for 15 years actually looked like as a number. He set the page down on the table. He looked at the deed. He looked at the LLC documents with his own name printed on them in clean black type. Then he put everything back in the box, returned it to Denise, thanked her, and walked out to his truck. He sat in the parking lot for a while. He did not call anyone. He did not feel what he might have expected to feel. There was no rush of excitement, no sharp turn of emotion. What he felt, sitting there in the August morning heat with the engine off and the windows down, was something closer to clarity. The kind that comes not from learning something new, but from finally seeing something that was always there. He drove back to Jerome's. He ate the plate Jerome had left covered on the stove. Eggs, toast, a little bit of the sausage from the refrigerator that was probably a day older than it should have been. He ate all of it. That evening he took Jerome's laptop and sat at the kitchen table and searched for Geneva's Southern Table. He read the Observer Review from 2011. He read the magazine feature from 2019. He read 14 customer reviews on 3 different platforms. He read every interview Geneva had given, including the one where she described building the restaurant from nothing, from sheer will, from a refusal to depend on anyone but herself. He read that one twice. Then he closed the laptop, went to his contacts and scrolled until he found a name he had not dialed in years. Walter Gaines, attorney at law. The number had been in his phone since the year Earl died. He had never deleted it. By the following morning, Raymond Dewitt had an appointment and a decision to make. Walter Gaines kept an office on South Tryon Street that looked exactly like the man himself. No frills, no wasted space, everything in its place and earning its keep. The waiting area had 4 chairs, a side table with a water pitcher, and a framed copy of his law school degree on the wall that had gone slightly crooked and never been straightened. Raymond noticed the degree when he sat down, noticed the year, and did the math. Walter had been practicing law for 31 years. He had handled Earl DeWitt's estate paperwork without a single error. Raymond had chosen correctly. Walter came out to meet him himself. He was a lean man in his late 50s, grey at the temples, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the unhurried bearing of someone who had heard every version of every story and was not easily rattled by any of them. He shook Raymond's hand, held the door to his office open, and said to come on in and have a seat. Raymond laid it out plainly. He told Walter about the LLC, the deed, the lease history, the management account. He told him about the marriage ending. He set the LLC documents on the desk along with the deed and the account summary, and he sat back and let Walter read without interrupting. Walter read everything twice the way careful men do. Then he set the papers down, folded his hands on top of them, and looked at Raymond directly. He asked one question. He asked whether Raymond wanted to protect himself or whether he wanted to act. Raymond said he wanted both, and he wanted them done right. Walter nodded. He pulled a legal pad from his drawer and uncapped a pen. Then he explained the position in the flat, factual language of a man who dealt in facts for a living. The commercial leases at 4400 North Davidson were annual term agreements that had been rolling over to month-to-month status at each renewal for the past several years, a common enough arrangement that neither tenant had ever questioned. As the sole managing member of DeWitt Property Solutions, LLC, Raymond had the unilateral right to issue non-renewal notices to both tenants simultaneously. He was not required to provide a reason beyond standard notice period language. The leases would terminate at the end of the current monthly term. There was nothing either tenant could do to prevent it through ordinary means. He let that settle for a moment. Then he told Raymond about Hargrove Hospitality Group. Hargrove was a regional developer that had been acquiring commercial properties in the Nodar corridor for the better part of 3 years, converting them into mixed-use food and retail concepts. Walter had handled 2 transactions involving properties adjacent to the strip center at 4400 North Davidson. He knew for a fact that Hargrove's acquisition director had inquired about that specific property 18 months ago and been told it was not available. He could make a call. Raymond asked what a sale would look like. Walter said, at current node evaluations and given Hargrove's appetite for the corridor, he would expect a letter of intent in the range of $2.2 to $2.4 million. All cash, clean close. No financing, contingencies. Raymond sat with that number for exactly 3 seconds. Then he told Walter to make the call. After that, the decisions came quickly, one after the other, stated without drama, the way Raymond did everything. No lease renewals for either unit, accept the Hargrove letter of intent when it came, and initiate divorce proceedings through a separate family law attorney with Raymond's interest in the LLC and the property documented clearly as premarital inherited assets not subject to equitable distribution. Walter wrote each item on the legal pad as Raymond said it. He did not editorials. He did not express surprise. He simply wrote and asked the next practical question. When Raymond told him he wanted his name kept entirely off all direct communications with the tenants through the closing process, that every letter, every notice, every piece of correspondence should go out under the LLC name and the management company's letterhead, Walter said that was standard practice and entirely appropriate. He said he would draft both non-renewal notices that afternoon. Raymond had one final instruction. He told Walter that both notices should go out on the same day to both units, simultaneously. He did not want one sibling warning the other. He wanted them to open their mail and find the same letter on the same Tuesday. Walter looked at him over the legal pad for just a moment. Then he wrote it down. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. When it was over, Raymond shook Walter's hand at the door and drove back to Jerome's. He sat at the kitchen table, opened the suitcase, and peeled back the left lining panel. He pressed the silver key back into place against the backing and smoothed the electrical tape down over it. He would not need the lockbox again. Everything it had held was already in motion. That evening he ate Jerome's cooking: pork chops, rice, green beans from a can that tasted better than they had any right to. And he went to bed before 9 and slept without difficulty for the first time since the anniversary night. On Monday morning, Walter Gaines dropped 2 certified letters into the postal system. One addressed to Geneva's Southern Table, one addressed to Crown Beauty and Supply, both citing the end of tenancy and the LLC's intention not to renew. That same afternoon, a family law attorney on the other side of Uptown filed Raymond's divorce petition with the Mecklenburg County Clerk's office. Geneva opened her mail on a Tuesday. The first Tuesday, the letter arrived at 2:15. Geneva was in the middle of the lunch-to-dinner transition, the brief, pressured window when the kitchen reset and the front of house got squared away for the evening crowd. She was going over a linen order with her floor manager when her kitchen manager came out from the back, holding an envelope, the kind with the green certified mail stripe across the top. Geneva signed for it without stopping the conversation. She finished her point about the linen order first, then she opened it. She read it once, set it down on the host stand, read it again. DeWitt Property Solutions, LLC, notice of non-renewal, end of current monthly term, premises to be vacated in accordance with lease agreement terms. She called the property management number listed at the bottom of the letter. It rang 4 times and went to a recorded message. She left a message. She called back an hour later, another message. She called 2 more times before closing. Nobody called back. Across the strip, Curtis got his letter in the same mail run. He called Geneva that evening and they met at the restaurant after close, sitting at the corner table nearest the kitchen where they always talked business. Curtis said it was a mistake, some kind of automated error, that corporate landlords sent these things out all the time. Geneva said she did not think it was a mistake. Curtis said they would fight it. Geneva agreed. They did not sleep well that night. The second Tuesday, Raymond signed the letter of intent from Hargrove Hospitality Group, $2.3 million, all cash, 60-day close. His name did not appear on any document that went to Geneva or Curtis. The LLC handled everything. Walter Gaines handled the LLC. It was clean and it was quiet, the way Raymond preferred things. Geneva had retained a commercial real estate attorney by midweek, a firm on Trade Street that specialized in tenant rights and lease disputes. Her attorney filed a formal challenge to the non-renewal and requested full documentation on the ownership structure of the property. A title search was initiated. The paralegal assigned to the case began pulling public records. Geneva told herself the process was moving, that she had people working on it, that this was fixable. The third Tuesday broke everything open. The paralegal ran the LLC registration through the North Carolina Secretary of State's business search portal. It took less than 4 minutes. The managing member field returned one name, Raymond A. DeWitt, 4712 Amherst Way, Charlotte, North Carolina. The paralegal printed the page and walked it to the attorney. The attorney looked at it for a moment. Then she picked up the phone and called Geneva and said she needed to come in that afternoon. Geneva drove to the Trade Street office and sat down across from her attorney. The attorney turned the document around and slid it across the desk without preamble. Geneva looked at it. She did not speak. Her attorney later described it to a colleague as one of the more unusual things she had witnessed in 30 years of practice. A woman sitting completely still in a chair, staring at a single piece of paper for close to 11 minutes. Not crying, not asking questions, just sitting there with the particular stillness of someone whose entire understanding of their own life has just been revised without their permission. Eventually, Geneva said, "That is my husband's name." Her attorney said she knew. Geneva drove home. She called Curtis from the driveway. She told him. There was a silence on his end of the line that lasted long enough for her to check if the call had dropped. Then Curtis said he was going to call Raymond. He tried 4 times, voicemail every time. That same evening, a process server knocked on the door of the house on Amherst Way and left the divorce petition paperwork in the door slot. Geneva found it when she got home. She stood in the hallway holding both documents, the LLC registration and the divorce papers, for a long time before she put them down. The 4th Tuesday finished it. The Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds posted the sale of 4400 North Davidson Street to public record as part of the standard weekly property transaction filing. The Charlotte Business Journal ran it in their Friday Property Digest under a clean 2-line item. Strip Center sold to Hargrove Hospitality Group, $2.3 million, closing pending. A food blogger who covered the Noda dining scene saw the item on a Saturday morning and posted a question to her 11,000 followers before she had finished her coffee. She wrote, "Is Geneva's southern table moving? The building just sold? Someone let me know." The post got 340 shares before Geneva saw it. Her phone started ringing before noon. Regulars? Loyal customers? A woman named Bernice, who had eaten there every Sunday for 6 years, called to ask if they were closing, and if so, what she was supposed to do about Sunday dinner now. Geneva issued a statement. 4 sentences. She said the restaurant was exploring its options and committed to serving the community. She said more details would follow. She thanked her loyal guests for their patience and support. She did not explain the one thing everyone was actually asking, how her husband of 20 years had been the owner of the building she called her life's work without her knowing a single word of it. The professional women in her circle started a group text that evening. She was not in it. Curtis drove across town to Jerome's house on Tuckasegee Road that same night. He sat in his car outside for 20 minutes. He never knocked. He drove away without making a sound. Raymond had one thing left to do. The closing date for 4400 North Davidson fell on a Wednesday morning in early October, when the air in Charlotte had finally started to carry that first thin edge of cool that comes before autumn settles in for real. Raymond was up before 5. He made coffee in Jerome's kitchen, standing at the counter in the dark, listening to the neighborhood come slowly awake around him. A dog somewhere down the street, a car pulling out early. The particular quiet of a morning when you know exactly what the day holds and you have made your peace with it. He dressed carefully. Dark slacks. A clean grey shirt he had pressed the night before. The same brown leather shoes he wore to church when he still went regularly, back when he and Geneva used to sit together in the 4th pew from the front. He did not rush. There was no need to rush. Everything was already in motion. Everything had already been decided. He put the old leather suitcase in the back of his truck before he left. He drove to North Davidson and parked across the street from the strip center at 7 in the morning, 2 full hours before the Hargrove hospitality team was scheduled to arrive for the final walkthrough. He turned the engine off and sat there with his hands resting in his lap, looking at the building through the windshield. He had driven past it hundreds of times over the 15 years he had owned it. He had never once pulled into the parking lot, had never walked the facade or checked the gutters or stood on the sidewalk to look at it the way an owner looks at a thing he built. He had left all of that to the management company. He had stayed in the background the way his Uncle Earl had taught him, present but invisible, invested but unannounced. He sat with the building for a while. Then he saw Geneva. She was already there, had come in early, likely before sunrise, the way she always did when something was wrong, and she needed the familiar sounds of her kitchen to steady herself. She was standing just inside the glass door of the restaurant in her white apron, and she saw his truck before she saw him. He watched her go still when she recognized it, watched her stand there for a moment. Then she pushed the door open and walked out into the parking lot. Raymond got out of the truck. He reached into the back seat and took the suitcase by the handle. He carried it across the street. They met in the middle of the parking lot on the asphalt that had been resealed twice in the years he had been paying the property taxes on this building. They stood about 6 feet apart in the early morning light, the first time they had been in the same physical space since the night she had pressed the latch on that suitcase and told him the locks were getting changed. Geneva opened her mouth to speak. Raymond raised one hand, just slightly, just enough. She stopped. He looked at the building for a long moment. He looked at the sign above the restaurant entrance. Geneva's Southern Table, the letters clean and gold against the dark background, exactly the way she had specified when she ordered it 7 years ago. Then he looked at her. He spoke quietly, the way he had always spoken. But there was nothing deferential in it now. Every word arrived with the weight of something that had been carried a long time and was finally being set down. He told her that he understood the life she had wanted to build. He said he had understood it from the beginning, had believed in it, had worked alongside it for 20 years without complaint. He told her that he knew she had outgrown him in her mind, that she had decided somewhere along the way that he was a limitation, an embarrassment, a man who could be reduced to nothing with a few sentences at a kitchen table while her brother stood at the refrigerator and laughed. He told her that he had heard every dismissal, every comparison, every silence that said more than words could. He said all of this without raising his voice, without anger, the way you state facts that no longer have the power to wound you. Then he told her about the property. He told her that 4400 North Davidson had belonged to DeWitt Property Solutions, LLC, since 2008. He told her that the LLC had always belonged to him, that every lease renewal, every rent payment, every first-of-the-month deposit, all of it had been going into his account for 15 years. That while she was building her identity on this corner, her foundation had been his name the entire time. He watched her face change. He said, "You told me I was too small for the life you were building. You spent 4 years making me feel like a burden in my own marriage. You stood in our kitchen on our anniversary, and you let Curtis talk to me like I was nobody, and you didn't say a single word. What you didn't know, Geneva, was that for 15 years you had been paying me rent, every plate you served, every customer who walked through that door. Every morning you unlocked this building. You did it on my name. And I never once said a thing, because I believed in us. I kept quiet because I thought one day you would see me." He paused. "But you helped me zip that suitcase. And you closed the latch yourself." He bent down and set the old leather suitcase on the asphalt between them. He straightened up and looked at her one final time. He said, "I think we are done here." He turned and walked back across the street to his truck. He did not look back. He started the engine, checked his mirror, and pulled away from the curb the way a man leaves a place he no longer needs. The Hargrove hospitality team arrived 12 minutes later in 2 vehicles, 3 people with clipboards and a site photographer. They pulled into the parking lot and got out and began consulting their paperwork. Geneva was still standing in the parking lot when they arrived. She did not go back inside. The building that had carried her name for 15 years was no longer hers, and the man she had dismissed was already gone. What happened to Geneva and to Curtis and to Raymond in the months that followed tells you everything you need to know about what was real in that marriage and what was only ever performance. The sale of 4,400 North Davidson Street closed on a Thursday morning in late October. $2.3 million, all cash, exactly as Walter Gaines had negotiated. Raymond signed the closing documents at a title company on South Boulevard and shook hands with the Hargrove representative and drove back to Jerome's in the same truck he had been driving for 9 years. He stopped at the Waffle House on Beatty's Ford Road and ate a full breakfast by himself. Eggs, scrambled soft, grits, bacon, wheat toast. He read the newspaper, he tipped well, he did not feel the need to mark the occasion any other way. The first thing he did with the proceeds before he moved, before he replaced anything, was call the West Charlotte Community Foundation. He had been thinking about Earl since the night he retrieved the lockbox. Thinking about what his uncle had built quietly, over decades, without announcement or applause. Earl DeWitt had believed that property was protection, that owning something real in this world was the difference between a man with options and a man without them. He had built his portfolio one parcel at a time, starting with almost nothing, and he had tried to pass that knowledge down to Raymond in the only language that lasts, deeds and documents and a key taped inside a suitcase lining. Raymond established the Earl DeWitt Small Business Fund as a revolving loan program through the foundation, capital for first-generation black business owners in West Charlotte and the surrounding neighborhoods where Earl had spent his life. The initial contribution was significant. The terms were generous. The first 3 loans went out within 4 months of the fund opening, to a woman starting a catering company in Druid Hills, to a young man opening a barbershop on Beatty's Ford Road 3 blocks from where Earl used to get his hair cut, and to a husband and wife who had been running a mobile auto detailing business out of their driveway and needed equipment to grow it into something real. Raymond attended the check presentation for all 3. He sat in the back. He did not make a speech. Geneva's Southern Table closed its doors at 4,400 North Davidson on the last day of November. She had spent 6 weeks after the closing trying to find a comparable space in Nodar at a rate she could afford. Nodar rents had climbed steadily. Nothing in her price range matched what she had built. She eventually signed a lease on a smaller space in University City. Less square footage, less foot traffic, a neighborhood that did not carry the same professional cachet. She reopened 3 months later. She put the same menu up. She bought new chairs. She made an announcement on social media that was full of the language of resilience and fresh starts. The lines did not come back the way they were. The regulars who had driven to Nodar because it was Geneva's place, because of the neighborhood and the atmosphere and the particular meaning of the location, did not make the drive to University City with the same faithfulness. Bernice, who had eaten there every Sunday for 6 years, went twice and then stopped. Geneva did not say anything publicly about any of it. She had learned, finally and at great cost, the difference between what she had built and what she had been handed. Curtis relocated Crown Beauty and Supply to a strip mall in Gastonia. He did not call Raymond. Not once. Raymond moved into a craftsman house on Beatty's Ford Road in December. 2 bedrooms, a front porch with a view of the street, a backyard with enough room for a garden he intended to start in the spring. The house needed some work, and he did the work himself on weekends, the way he had always fixed things, methodically and without complaint. He still drove the same truck. He did not buy new luggage. The old leather suitcase went on the top shelf of the new bedroom closet, in the same position it had always occupied, out of habit and out of something that felt like respect. He started cooking again on Sundays. Real cooking. The kind that starts at noon and fills the house with smell by 3. Oxtails and butter beans. Cornbread in the cast iron. A sweet potato pie that his grandmother had taught him to make when he was 11 years old, and that he had not made since before the marriage. Neighbors started appearing at the door without much provocation. He did not turn anyone away. The table on the back porch fit 6 comfortably, and 8 if nobody complained about being close. 8 months after the closing, Raymond attended a quarterly meeting of the West Charlotte Community Foundation at their offices near Johnson C. Smith University. He sat in the third row with a notepad and a pen he had borrowed from Jerome and forgotten to return. The loan committee chair was going through the applications for the next funding cycle when the woman beside him reached over without preamble and picked up his pen to make a note on her own papers. She did not give it back. Her name was Patricia Odom. She was 54, a retired city planner who had spent 30 years shaping how Charlotte grew, and who now spent her time trying to make sure the growth benefited the people who had been there longest. She had opinions about zoning and land use and the specific ways that money and policy intersected to determine who gets to stay in a neighborhood and who gets pushed out. After the meeting, she handed Raymond her business card and said that if he ever wanted to talk land use strategy over coffee, she happened to know a few things about Noda's development history that he might find interesting. Raymond laughed, not a polite laugh, not the careful, contained version of laughter he had practiced for 20 years in a house where his joy had slowly become inconvenient. A real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere low and genuine and surprises even the person doing it. He kept her card in his jacket pocket, in the same place he used to keep the silver key. Now here is what I want you to sit with as this story comes to a close. Raymond DeWitt did not set out to destroy Geneva. He did not plan any of this from the beginning. He was a man who loved his wife, who showed up for 20 years, who paid the taxes on a piece of land and never once asked for recognition for it. He was a man who was dismissed so thoroughly that his own wife pressed the latch on the suitcase that carried everything she didn't know she needed to fear. The people who underestimate you are often standing on the very foundation you built. And the saddest part is, they never even look down. Now I want to ask you something before you go. If you had been in Raymond's position, 20 years of patience, 20 years of silence, and then the moment when you finally held all the cards, what would you have done? Would you have used it the way he did, or would you have done something different? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it helps this community grow so that more people can find these stories when they need them. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time, because we have more stories coming that you do not want to miss. I will see you in the next one.